Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're listening to Box F1 Pod. Today we're debriefing a really weird Singapore Grand Prix, but first it's time for a quick digital warm-up. Lap 1, trackside. Alright, so it's Max's birthday, or it was Max's birthday. So it's time for cake watch. Obviously, I've been ranking paddock side birthday cakes for like a year now, but I must say I think Max's birthday cakes, yeah, with an S, topped the list. First of all, Max had 3 cakes. One came from, I assume, the team, because it was a very like professional like chocolate gâteau that you get like at a restaurant. That looks like it came from the kitchen. Christian presented it to Max, and it was very lovely. A little boring, but it was lovely. At least it was edible. You know how some of these cakes are not edible. And then his engineering team split into 2 groups, and they each decorated a cake. The cakes were ugly AF. They should for sure stick to car-related tasks. They did not have a future in cake decorating. But you know how when like kids give a birthday card to their parents and they're like really ugly, then you put them on your fridge anyways. I'm talking like I have children. But it gets put on the fridge anyways because it's from like little kids and it's cute and like the love is there. This is like the same thing. It's such like a wholesome sentiment that no one cares if the cakes are cute or not. Also, all of these cakes probably taste like infinitely better than any of those cakes that are like 90% fondant. So that's a step up. And it just felt like very personal and very intimate. So I loved that they decorated cakes for him. And I think this should be an actual tradition. They should all do this. Also, I love the video of the team singing happy birthday to Max while he just stands there with his hands on his hips, like nodding along, like, yep, I suppose it is my birthday. This is a rendition of happy birthday. Yep. And then clapped for them like, oh yes, very good, you did well. Not like in a rude way, just like the fact that his like automatic, like his natural stance is hands on hips is very dad. Very dad. I love the celebrations for his birthday in conclusion, but unfortunately, the greatness of the celebration does not cancel out the birthday curse, which we will get into. Also, the prep continues for the Singapore Grand Prix. Or the episode earlier this week, we talked about the kind of preparations the drivers are going through, most of which included like dragging a gym or equipment into a sauna and just training in the sauna. But now that they're on site, they've like mixed, it's very like temperature focused training. So like you'd think they were going like on a trip with Bear Grylls. Sorry. Does anyone remember the behind the scenes at the Miami Grand Prix where Alex and Charles were talking to F1 and I think someone was wearing I think Alex was wearing a Bear Grylls shirt or something, and he tried to, and Charles had no idea what Bear Grylls was, and Alex is like attempting to explain this, and he was like, is it a movie? He's like, oh no, it's like a show. And he's like, so like a documentary? And he's like, kinda. And Charles like, I must check this out. Anyway, that was a complete aside. But in addition to all the hot sauna training they were doing, they are now including cold training, although they're not working out in cold temperatures, thank God. But they are doing a lot of ice baths, and I'm glad to see they've upgraded from trash cans to actual bathtubs, still plastic because they're on the side of the track, but they're doing ice baths, and they're doing a lot of cryotherapy. Like they have a lot of cryo chambers where they're all just sitting there like bobbing about. I really want to know if they're traveling with their own cryo chambers or if they're like visiting a local provider. Like, where did all these cryo chambers, or is there like a one for all the teams, or does each team have their individual cryo chamber? Wouldn't put it past them, but I'm just curious. All right, let's talk quickly about some press conference highlights. A big one for me was seeing Alex Albon out and about. He says he's fit and ready. He started training last week, which is crazy to me. But like, it's so impressive. Like elite athletes at this level, just like are abnormal. Obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be doing this. But like they're like moments like these remind you that they are abnormal. No normal person 2 weeks after respiratory failure would, like, you might be going on like walks around your neighborhood. Would you be driving 225 miles per hour in the most humid, hot, complex race of all time? No, you wouldn't be doing that. But Alex is. He did tell a funny story about how he was obviously at the hospital after his respiratory failure during the Monza Grand Prix, and he woke up to watch the race, but he had to be monitored as he watched it because he was getting so frustrated and so nervous that his heart rate kept going off, and eventually they had to shut off the Grand Prix because it was too much for Alex Albon. His heart rate was far too elevated for the doctors to feel comfortable. But he also mentioned that he's not worried about any post-op complications, but he's just worried about complications with Singapore in general. But like, surely those go hand in hand. Like, everyone's worried about Singapore in general, but like, the fact that you are post-op makes Singapore even more hard for you. So, especially since like his whole issue was like respiratory, and like, I'm sure like he's okay in terms of the appendicitis surgery, and it's the respiratory thing, the fact that he had respiratory failure to drive in the hottest race ever, where you need to breathe, is concerning. But again, I'm sure he has like a team of doctors that are far more qualified than I am, that are observing him, this human who's far more resilient than I am. All I can say is that there's a reason I am talking about this on a microphone and not driving a race car. Anyway, other people who are maimed, Lando is injured. I tried to figure out how he got injured. He has a leg injury. But every article discussing this injury says that Lando confirmed his leg injury, and then the following paragraph says he got out of a Lego McLaren yesterday. And I can't figure out if the Lego McLaren, the like coming out of it, is what caused the injury, or if the fact that he was able to come out of that Lego McLaren proves that the injury is not that bad. But regardless, there's a bandage on his leg. He is somehow injured, but obviously that also didn't deter his performance. These athletes, man, I marvel every day. Also, this is not that important, but during the press conferences, Checo and Lance were sitting next to each other, and they were like deep in conversation, only like pausing to answer any questions directed at either of them specifically, and then they talked right through everyone else. It was like an intense conversation. I really need to know what they were talking about. Celebrities that were on track. will.i.am was there. He's always there. Also, he's wearing a really cool Mercedes jacket. I don't know where he got it. I think he also somehow partnered with Mercedes. But he was there. Plug the voice. That was great. Also, Alan Carr, who's a British TV show host, like a nighttime host / comedian. Jamie Redknapp, who's a former English footballer and now like a Sky pundit. And Micah Richards, who is host of the British TV show A League of Their Own, were all guests of Red Bull, and they filmed some sort of content for Sky with them that I have not been able to find yet. I saw them talk about it in an interview, but I haven't seen the full segment, which I'm sure is going to be hilarious. But the thing I enjoyed the most from their interview was that one of them mentioned that this is really painful for Micah because he's actually a huge Mercedes fan and a huge Lewis fan. And he like tried to play it off and be like diplomatic, like, no, I love Red Bull. And then finally he broke down and was like, I tried to say hi to Lewis, but he snubbed me because I was wearing a Red Bull shirt. He thought I was the enemy, basically. I thought it was funny. Also, Marshmello, the DJ, was there, and he switched helmets, like his Marshmello helmet with a driver's helmet. He switched it with a driver, and I'll give you guys 3 guesses who. If freshly minted DJ expert Lando Norris was not your first guess, then you have not been keeping up lately. It was obviously Lando. They, Marshmello put on his helmet, Lando put on Marshmello's marshmallow, and they took a picture. By the way, speaking of Lando's new hobbies, he is taking photography seriously enough to create an Instagram page for it called lando.jpg. I will restrain myself from further comments, but I will say that during the press conferences, Lando said that he arrived to Singapore a bit early and he's been exploring the city, which we've seen through his pictures, and trying new restaurants. So I'm really happy that his taste buds have evolved from just milk. He's come a long way. Maybe he'll have sushi in Japan. And if Lando.jpg starts featuring food pics, I'll be a much bigger fan. All right, lap 2, budget cap breach. Okay, so this is the drama everyone's been talking about. I'll try to do a quick recap. Nothing's final yet, so I don't want to spend too much time on it until we have like an actual answer. But basically, last year, 2021, the FIA introduced a budget cap of $145 million per team. This year, it was amended to $140 million per team, but that has been adjusted since to account for inflation and other unforeseen circumstances, like the Ukrainian war, which apparently has dramatically impacted F1. But also, the teams that have been complaining about the budget caps the most were obviously the bigger budget teams. Lower ranking teams didn't really have an issue with staying within the cap because they're used to spending less money. Anyways, at the moment, Red Bull and Aston Martin are accused of breaching the budget cap in 2021, which would obviously have an impact on their 2021 results, but it could also affect 2022 and even 2023 because it depends on how their budget was allocated. At the moment, it's believed that both breaches are minor, as in less than 5% of the budget, which is no more than $7 million. However, the FIA has released a statement that they have not ruled either way, and at the moment, all of this is kind of just rumors. But there is an ongoing investigation, whether that's like a separate investigation, whether that's the FIA just going through everyone's finances. I'm not totally sure, but they are still in the process of reviewing everyone's 2021 finances. There have been conspiracy theories thrown around as per. One of them is that Mercedes is using Aston to do some testing, but doing it through Aston so as not to like flag themselves. However, the teams making the most noise about this breach of budget caps are Ferrari and Mercedes. So I kind of doubt Mercedes is involved unless they're just like trying. No, I don't know why they would be involved if they are using Aston Martin to do their own research. Also, I doubt Lawrence would allow himself to be exploited in such a way. Never forget the hostage video he filmed denying building a pink Mercedes. He would never. But at the moment, I don't know what to make of these rumors. I'd like to think they're untrue, so I'm just going to go with that. I think Christian did everything above board. And I think if Christian didn't do something above board, then all the other teams are equally as guilty. I think they're all like shady to the same level, generally. But I will say that supposing this is true, at least we know what Red Bull did with the extra money. What the fuck has Aston Martin done? Like, what do they have to show for overspending? Nothing. Anyway, all right, lap 4, outfit of the day. Guys, you know what I love wearing when it's hot and humid and really sticky? Sweaters. I love sweaters. I pull out all of my favorite knitted pieces and just stick them on. Literally, because I'd be so sweaty that they would just stick to me. And that's what Lewis chose to do this Singapore Grand Prix. He wore not 1, not 2, but 3 knitted outfits this weekend. He wore a matching Missoni pants and sweater vest, which is in like a white, gray, and pale yellow kind of situation. He wore a button-up Versace embroidered like button-up sweater and purple slacks, also from Versace, and a set from Kenzo with like white pants and like a knitted blue and yellow zip-up that kind of is reminiscent of that, like those big circles that he wore at one point. Different designer though. And I like the Missoni and I like the Kenzo sweater, but like we are in Singapore. Pull out your best linen. Like, you're not dressing for the vibe, the weather, or like the activity. So I'm like, what are you dressing for? The picture? Which is, I guess, fair enough. I don't know. Like, they're cool outfits. Maybe I would appreciate them more if they were like copy pasted into a different environment. Um, as standalone pieces, they're very cool, but I can't sort of see past the situation. You know? But again, I loved the Kenzo zip up, and I did actually really like the Missoni set. Very like unusual Missoni, so that was really cool. Anyways, I also need to shout out Box's favorite fashionista of late, George Russell. He sported the team kit. And you know why? Carmen wasn't there. I guess George's style is directly tied to Carmen physically being there to perfectly curate like their collective look. Perhaps Carmen's presence is also tied to George's success in the race. So that's a double loss for George this weekend. Not that he looked bad in his kit. I'm happy to be at that neutral position. Better neutral than ugly, I always say. That's not very like fashion forward, risk taken. But I'd always rather look good and neutral than ugly. Anyway, on that note, that concludes our digital warm-up. Do-do-do. On to the race rhyme. Welcome to the Singapore Grand Prix. It's the official F1 night race, you see. The sun has set and the city is aglow. It's too bad the rain opted for a non-stop flow. The race is delayed, but it's not nearly as fun as Spa last year. The drivers aren't eating and tweeting and playing chess waiting for things to clear. But Singapore has a super good drainage situation, so eventually we start the race, which should be cause for celebration. Instead, endless chaos and zero action is what we're forced to endure. With 5 safety cars and 6 DNFs, how there wasn't more activity, I'm unsure. I guess with the race so damp both on track and in the air, you really never know how these drivers are gonna fare. Like, even though Charles gets pole, Checo leads from the start like a boss. Defense and tire maintenance is to Checo like getting married is to Ross. Charles does give him a run for his money though in the final few laps, but once beast mode is activated, Checo is king of the tracks. In fact, any battles we got mostly happened towards the end, like Max fighting his way to points going absolutely full send. This race was supposed to secure Max's win, but it did not. Once again, the birthday curse is coming in hot. That's okay, there's always next week for Max at the Japanese Grand Prix. But for now, Checo, Charles, and Carlos are our sweaty top 3. On to analysis. Okay, so quali was wet. It rained earlier and the track was still damp and it went from like wet to dry, which is super exciting conditions. Some highlights from the day were that Daniel went out in Q1. Mick made it to Q2. George was out in Q2. He made a gamble on soft tires and it didn't work, but he did post a post-quali photo on Instagram where he's very thoughtful, sitting with his engineer, thinking about his tire choices. So I'm glad he had a strategy sesh and documented it. It did get a little crazy at the end of Q3 as it felt like every second there was a new person on pole. At one point the commentator literally goes, Lewis hasn't been on pole this year and he still won't be. Max almost got pole during his flying lap. He got called into the pit and he was pissed. He was like, why? What the fuck? Why? And the reason was that he did not have enough fuel. Well, he had enough fuel to finish the lap, but he wouldn't have had enough for the FIA sample that they're required to have within the tank at the end of each session. So he was pissed. The team fucked up, but need I remind everyone, it was Max's birthday, and we all know what happens on birthday weekends in F1. Tragedy. Anyway, so the final results for qualifying were Charles in P1 in pole, followed by Checo, Lewis, Carlos, Fernando, Lando, Pierre, Max, Kevin, and Yuki. And George actually ended up taking an entirely new power unit, so he ended up starting from the pit lane. So, personal story, I woke up at 3 a.m. to watch this race, only to find out that it was delayed. It ended up starting like 6 a.m. my time. So that was great. But to be fair, everyone was complaining, but I could see why it was delayed. There was lightning, it was pouring rain. You could like literally splash in the puddles. Like they could have done their ice baths in the track. It just wouldn't have been very icy, but you know. Eventually it became obvious that the rain was going to stop about 3 minutes before what should have been the start of the race. But the race ended up being delayed for an entire hour because they had to account for like starting procedure, for national anthem, for a grid setup, all that fun, necessary stuff. So there ended up being an hour delay, which meant that the race would either be the allotted lap time or it would be 2 hours, depending on which was faster. They basically needed that time also to drain the road. And like I said at the beginning of the episode, this was a very weird race. It was super bizarre. It was like simultaneously very chaotic and simultaneously boring. So in my debrief, I've decided to kind of split the race in half. The first half is basically where the bulk of all the incidents and no action happened, and the second half, there were still a couple incidents, but there was a bit more action, particularly towards the end. So we're going to split it up that way. But first, I need to talk about the star of the show today, the weather. Now, like, we went into Singapore knowing it was going to be hot and muggy and humid and gross. Hence why Lewis brought all his sweaters. But we also knew that it was going to rain today. Hence why Lewis brought his boots. Lewis is very well prepared. So I'm not sure people anticipated quite the level of rain that we were going to be receiving, like the lightning and the downpour. Like, I don't know if that's what we were preparing for. I personally was not preparing for it. I don't know about everyone else. The issue became that despite the like advanced drainage system in place at the Singapore track, which is quite rare for most tracks, they usually don't have that. Like Spa could use with a drainage system, let's be honest, but they don't have one. But the issue here was that it was very humid and there was a lot of wetness in the air. Like the air was wet, so it's hard for the track to dry up when it's just wet. So in addition to drivers being like tired and dehydrated, they're also like struggling with a wet, like a damp track. I don't want to fully say wet, but it was damp. And it took forever for a dry line to appear, and it never like fully appeared, I don't think. I'm not sure it ever actually came. There were dry patches. There was like a glimmer of a dry line, but not really. In general, the track was very greasy and slippery. There were no puddles, which is why they were allowed to start, but even so, like in the first few minutes, the visibility was and after that, it was just like driving on damp roads and everyone trying to figure out what to do. In particular, this was important for tires because this is a slick tire race. However, given the situation with the road, they all had to start on intermediates. And the plan for everyone basically was to switch to slicks as soon as possible, which unfortunately was not particularly soon. Which was also kind of annoying because Lewis got on the radio at the beginning of the race and was like, "You guys should listen to me, man. I told you these were the wrong tires." Like, what tires did you want to go on, Lewis? Like, what was your plan? What was your great plan? There was a shot of like there were no tires on Lewis's car, clearly because they were arguing, and unclear whether Mercedes had their own reasons or if it was because everyone else went with the intermediates. They're like, we're not just going to do something random. But it kind of seems like there were few other options. Because, like, George, who was just having a tragic race, switched to mediums, like, pretty early on. And it was a disaster. like complete disaster, and it was very obvious that he switched way too early. So I don't know what Lewis was planning on doing. But anyway, George eventually began to pick up speed, and around that time, Pierre also switched to mediums and was like zooming around track, and that's when it became obvious to everyone that the track was ready for slicks, and that's when the race took a turn for the better. Unfortunately, by the time it actually started getting better, the race was over. But anyway, a couple things to note. Word of the day, attritional. This track is attritional, which is what the commentator said to us over and over and over again. DRS only opened in like the final quarter of the race because apparently it was too dangerous. Although as soon as slicks came out and it was safe enough to drive on slicks, then it was safe enough to use DRS, which is what the commentators and teams were clearly like, FIA, come on! They're operating on like island time or Spanish time or just not the time that everyone else is operating on because they are slow. Anyway, let's dig into the first half of the race. So the start was exciting, I guess. Checo had a phenomenal start and immediately took the lead of the race. Carlos and Lewis had contact at the start, which sent Lewis wide and off track and prompted the tire radio I mentioned earlier, where he was like, I tried to warn you about these tires. In the future, you need to listen to me. And would like to note that George is in 17th place, which is actually good because he started from the pit lane, but unfortunately it does not go up from there for him. Max unfortunately had a terrible start, which is very unlike him, and he lost places and fell back to P12, but gained it back pretty quickly in the next few laps. All right, let's dig into the major incidents that happened during the first half of this race. Before the race, Toto said that George was like praying for a safety car. He for sure got his wish, but I don't know if it got him the result he was like going for, but if he just wanted a safety car, he got it. Incident number 1. Alex Albon backed into the wall, but he was able to rejoin the race. So that was a non-incident, but an incident nonetheless. Incident number 2, there was an issue with Kevin Magnussen and Max, which caused damage to Kevin's front wing and ended up earning him a black and orange flag. Incident number 3 was a big one. It was between Latifi and Guan Yu. Guan Yu was trying to overtake Latifi, and it was actually a very smooth overtake. There was nothing wrong there. There was plenty of space for everyone. They both fit on the track. Like, Latifi had already let Guan Yu in. Guan Yu was in the door. And then Latifi was like, oh, I changed my mind. And just, like, rammed across the track and hit Guan Yu. It was, like, really bizarre. And, like, I don't know what he was doing. But it took Guan Yu out of the race. And even though he was parked in a relatively decent place, it still issued a safety car. From the incident, Latifi got a puncture and had to go into the pit lane where they tried and failed to fix his car, and he DNF'd. His punishment for causing this incident is that Nicholas got hit with a 5-grid penalty for Japan, which I'm sure will impact his race deeply. And we are officially starting a safety car count, and this is safety car number 1. Also would like to note that the only pit stop made during this safety car was Kevin Magnussen, who was forced to pit because of the black and orange flag, but no one else pitted. To be fair, this is early on in the race. Incident number 4, Alonso DNF'd. Everyone is like on the radio at the moment discussing whether it's time to switch or not. Carlos was basically the only one pro-switch, but that's because nothing was actually going right for him. So he's like, let's switch, even though it was clearly not the time to switch. Alonso got on his radio, and they also determined that it was too early to switch, and the conversation ended positively, like, soon. And then all of a sudden, Alonso just DNF'd. Like, very undramatically, like, you almost didn't know what happened. But this was his 350th Grand Prix, so it's kind of sad that he didn't get to finish it. But this issue caused a VSC, which I'm lumping VSCs and safety cars together. So now the safety car count is 2. During this virtual safety car, George came in for medium tires. Because honestly, what else was he going to do? He was like at the back of the grid. But it goes tragically wrong for him. Like, they do not work. That this is not a medium tire track situation right now. So anyone who was thinking about switching, cough cough, Carlos, probably changed their mind. All right, on to incident number 5, Alex Albon DNF. Alex basically goes into the wall and loses his front wing. He comes in to get a change, but the car was too damaged. And I thought it was really cute when he came in. The Williams team was standing there, like, arms abreast, like, holding this front wing, like, way in advance. Like, I think the second he hit the car, the second he hit the wall, they popped out, like, ready with his front wing. Just, like, really want to help Alex. Unfortunately, there was nothing they could do. He had to DNF. The car was too damaged, and a virtual safety car was issued. This is safety car count number 3. And his front wing was, like, really wedged into the wall. It took several marshals to, like, pull it out. And I do need to know, again, I know I've talked about this a lot, and all this is doing is making me seem very unathletic, but the fact that Alex Albon even showed up after being on a ventilator 2 weeks ago is incredible, and I think, like, this is a win for him, even though he had to DNF. All right, incident number 6, Esteban Ocon DNF. Literally a lap after Alex's virtual safety car ends, Esteban's engine just gives up on him, but, like, way more dramatically than Fernando's DNF. There's smoke everywhere, something's leaking from the car, it's not ideal. It's also not a great situation for Alpine, who now have a double retirement, and given their precarious standing in the Constructor Championship, it's, like, basically, like, opening the gates for McLaren to just charge in. But this is virtual safety car number 4. And I would like to note that still no one has pitted for a tire change. Ferrari's pit crew did come out during this virtual safety car, but no one came in, so either they were bluffing or they got confused. And to be honest, when it comes to Ferrari, either option is plausible. So now we're about halfway through the race, about lap 31-ish. And the current lineup is Checo in first, followed by Charles, Carlos, Lewis, Lando, and Max. Other than Max making his way into the top 6, this is the exact lineup we had after the start. We're halfway through the race. There have been 6 incidents so far, 4 safety cars, and literally nothing has happened. So if you were like, why is she just listing a bunch of incidents one after the other? It's because there's nothing else to talk about. There's no strategy to talk about. There are no pit stops to talk about. There's no battles to talk about. There's nothing to talk about other than the incidents that did nothing. All right, let's move on to the second half, where there's a bit more action, although we are starting with another incident. This is incident number 7 for anyone keeping track. Lewis backs up into the wall. Basically, he went off track and landed in the wall, but managed to reverse back onto the grid and ends up right in between Max, who was trying to battle P5 from Lando. So now Max has to overtake Lewis and Lando. The team got on the radio and informed Lewis that his car looks intact, which is good. This incident did cause Lewis to get on the radio and say, "I'm so sorry about that, guys. I fucked up big time, man." And his engineer said, Bono said, "Don't sweat it, Lewis. We're still in it, mate." You weren't, but that's nice. Like, it's such a pleasant exchange when Lewis fucks up, but, like, when his team didn't do the tires he wanted, it was like, honestly, out of all the drivers on the grid, I think I would least like to be told off by Lewis, because I would just be very guilty and disappointed in myself. I do not want to be on the receiving end of a radio call from an angry or upset Lewis Hamilton. Don't know why, but that for some reason would hit me the hardest out of all of the drivers phoning in angry or upset. Okay, let's take a quick pause from the incidents that have been consuming this race and talk about a non-safety car pit stop. And just like a pit stop in general. Pierre comes into the pits, puts on mediums, and he is fast, bro. He is zooming along like no tomorrow. So this is a turnaround point for this race because now we know that the track can handle slicks. And finally, there's just like an influx of pit stops, just like non-stop pit stops. Lewis's pit stop obviously includes a front wing change. Charles had a 5.3 second pit stop. He had no wing change. Checo's one of the last people to come in, and I think even Christian noted at the end, I mean, this was assumed. I think we can always assume this, but Christian noted at the end of the race that his tires were in great shape. And only Checo can do that because he's, for real, the king of tire management. For reals. So Max is the very last one to pit. He pits after Checo, and he's the last person to pit in general before the next incident. So let's get back to incidents. Incident number 8, Yuki DNFs. So the new tires were, I guess, a bit too much for Yuki to handle, like coming right out of the pit lane. He overshot it a bit and landed in the wall, and it caused a safety car. This is safety car count number 5, and Yuki had the DNF. So this is now DNF count number 6. But the shot of Yuki in the garage looking so absolutely dejected, like he's covered in sweat, but it kind of looks like tears, whether it's sweat or tears or both. It's just so sad to see poor little Yuki like this. Like, he looks so cute and he looks so sad, and like you just want to hug him. Hopefully he'll have a much better race in Japan. This was just really unlucky for him. But this safety car does give way to several more pit stops. Unfortunately for most people, they missed a chance at a free pit stop, but George came in for his second pit stop now since he was one of the first to pit. Again, this is not much for his race, but both McLarens pit as well because they have not pitted yet. And Daniel goes on softs, which is keeping it original. Daniel's having a great race, by the way. He had a tragic day yesterday, but we can pretend that none of these DNFs happened, and he's still having a great race. So, at the restart, the number of laps is officially longer than the race time allotted. So they've stopped showing us number of laps left and started showing a countdown, which I hate because everyone's still talking in laps and not minutes. So it's confusing because how are we supposed to know how many laps are left or what lap we're on or whatever? So at this restart, the order is as follows: Checo, Charles, Carlos, Lando, Max, Daniel, Lance, Seb, Lewis, Gasly, Mick, Valtteri, Kevin, and George. The only change to the top is that Lewis plummeted way down after his really lengthy pit stop, and he is now in 9th. At this restart, also Checo is noted for a safety car infringement, and he has to visit Stu after the race because apparently Stu can't be bothered in this moment. He's like, I've got other stuff to do. Don't know what, but basically Ferrari believed that Checo left more than 10 car lengths behind the safety car twice, which theoretically is allowed if the safety car lights are out, or if he had already closed the gap. If he had closed the gap before the lights went out. Lewis complained about this, and Ferrari complained about this. And Stu was like, I'll deal with this later. But this could mean some sort of penalty. Everyone was assuming it's 2 5-second penalties on the line, so he could potentially lose 10 seconds. Okay, so incident number 9, Max's failed overtake. I want to note before I go into this that at the restart, the track is colder, the engines are colder, the tires are colder, everything is colder except for the drivers. But you have to be super careful and controlled. And you would think that Max would have that on lock because he's one of the most controlled and careful drivers. I know he has a reputation for being kind of erratic, but he's a controlled erratic. And he kind of lost control, basically. So, like, at the restart, he attempts to overtake Lando, but realizes he's going too fast for the temperature of the tires and whatever. And so he tries to brake, but he starts braking while he's still on a wet part of the track, and then he transitions to a dry part of the track, and that causes a lock up, and he goes way off track down the safety emergency exit, the safety road? escape road. He goes down the escape road and re-enters the race in P8. He goes on the radio, says, I completely bottled that, and says he needs to pit, and he comes out last in the race, which is P14. Not that far. And now he has to make his way back up. All right, so after this restart, we finally started to see some battles. There was a battle between George and Mick. George says that Schumacher is defending like it's the race of his life. George also ended up getting a puncture and has to pit. This was not a good day for George. Not a good day. Another epic battle or battles is between Charles and Checo for several laps, though I don't know how many laps because they won't show me number of laps. Charles and Checo were basically wheel to wheel, with Charles like so close to Checo. It was wild. Like he came so close to overtaking a couple of times, but there was no DRS. And Charles really needed that edge to overtake Checo, and so he was unable to do it. But the battle was really great. It was really clean, great racing from both of them, and of course, as always, great defending from Checo. So that was like finally something fun to watch. But also, like towards the tail end of that, they both actually get told they need to go faster because Checo needs to create a gap between them in case he does get the penalties, so that he can still maintain the lead or still maintain the win. So Checo speeds up, and I assume Charles also tries to speed up, but he for some reason is unable to and finishes the race like almost 8 seconds behind Checo. And then the other battle is just Max and just everyone else. With like 13 minutes to go, Max manages to overtake Gasly and Valtteri. With 7 minutes left, Max attempts to overtake Lewis and Seb. It was 3 world champions in a row. And in front of them was Lance Stroll. Max overtakes Lewis first, and then Max does end up overtaking Lewis, and then manages to overtake Seb literally with like the checker flag in sight. It was a great drive, all things considered, from Max. Like starting in a bad position yesterday, the wet track not being in his favor, like being a difficult track to overtake, just being a difficult track in general, him messing up a few laps ago and having to start literally from the back and make his way back up. Like all of these things, all of them considered, he did pretty well, and he really pushed towards the end. So that was, you expect nothing else from him. All right. Cool down room and podium. So all the drivers are super sweaty and exhausted, and it's low-key kind of gross. My favorite part about the cool down room was when Checo reprimanded Charles for pushing him so hard in the last few laps. He's like, "You almost got me." That was hard. The saddest part was Max just like sitting on the ground outside with his engineers, looking just kind of disappointed. I wouldn't say he looked sad or necessarily upset. He was like having a normal conversation with them, but he seemed kind of unhappy and a bit dejected. Like he worked really hard. And one of the commentators were saying that like everyone's exhausted, but like for Checo, like he has the adrenaline of winning, and that sort of can carry him through. But when you lose, or when you get so close, or when things just don't go your way, like that exhaustion feels like far more exhausting, you know? And I did really enjoy seeing how happy Christian and Dr. Hella Marco were for Checo. And the only thing missing here is Checo's dad. I would have loved to seen his reaction, although I think we know what it would have been. Also, there are a lot of shots of Charles' girlfriend, who's literally named Charlotte and is also like the prettiest thing I've ever seen. I cannot get over it. So pretty. Everyone from Monaco like that. Is everyone just flawless? All right, so the final results of the race were Checo in first, Charles in second, Carlos, Lando, Daniel, Lance, Max, Seb, Lewis, Pierre, Valtteri, Kevin, Mick, and George. And Checo did go see Stu after the race, and Stu thought long and hard, seriously, for like several hours after Checo left, and it was determined that he can keep his race win. So Checo is still first. Yay. Also, there were 6 DNFs, including Yuki, Esteban, Alex, Fernando, Nicholas, Latifi, and Joe Guan Yu. And for anyone who was keeping score, there were 5 safety cars, 2 real safety cars, and 3 virtual safety cars, and a total of 9 incidents. 9. So many. The driver of the day officially is Checo, and unofficially still Checo. He just did a flawless job. They all kept saying it's his best race, but like all of Checo's wins have been so epic. All of them. So, and boy loves the city track these days. Like, he's really into it. Anyway, all of his wins have been so epic. I don't know if I can go as far as to say this was his best one, but he was flawless considering this was such a challenging race, challenging track, challenging situation. No, he didn't have any crazy battles except for at the very end, which is probably when he was the most tired. So it probably felt like the worst thing ever. But it was just great driving from him today. Also, I could probably give Daniel a shout out for going from P16 to P5. I will always give Daniel a shout out when I can. We did have 6 DNFs, but we can just pretend those. We can just ignore them and give Daniel props because he did have a great day today, and I'm so happy he got to finish P5. All right, Dick in the box. The Singapore weather. Also, Nicholas Latifi, I guess that's specifically for Joe. The safety car didn't actually mess anything up for anyone else, but it was pretty dumb of Nicholas Latifi. So yeah, he can be the dick in the box. All right, moving on. Welcome to our news segment, F1 Conspiracy Chit Chat, where we chit chat about all things conspiracies. Today, we're highlighting the birthday curse. Now, this warrants a much deeper dive to understand like how far back it goes and like the root cause. But if we just look at this weekend alone, Esteban and Max both celebrated their birthdays recently. Esteban DNF'd and Max had like no shortage of bad luck. Coincidence? I think not. Drivers never do well on their birthday. Even if it's not like a full DNF, they suffer from terrible luck all weekend. There are 0 exceptions. Show me one driver that podiumed on their birthday. This is a bold statement for me since I haven't actually gone this in depth yet and I can't back it up, but I'm standing by it. The birthday curse is as real as the Monegasque curse and the Monza curse, which incidentally, the Monza curse started with Charles and is therefore an offshoot of the Monegasque curse. In like the same way that like Voldemort cursed the Defense Against the Dark Arts seat. So that he didn't get it, so no one got it after him. So the Monza curse happened to Charles, and then everyone who follows suffers the same fate, you know? Anyways, anyone looking for an explanation for Max's weekend in Singapore, look no further. It was the birthday curse. Okay. Quick stat corner. This was Alonso's 350th race, and it was a tragic disaster. Also, George's top 5 finish streak is over. I am shocked not a single pundit mentioned it, but it is in fact over. And if they amend this stat to be George has finished top 5 in every race besides Silverstone and Singapore, I will lose it. Also, I don't know if this is a stat, but Mick was the only Singapore rookie to finish the race, which is kind of sad. All right, let's quickly review the standings. Driver championship, Max has 341 points. Charles has 237 points. Checo has 235 points. George has 203 points. Carlos has 202. Lewis has 170. And Lando has 100. Max has not yet clinched the title, but he is close. But so are Charles and Checo with each other, so it'd be cool to see who gets second place. Or if they can keep Max from winning. Highly unlikely, but the constructor standings are as follows. Red Bull with 576 points, Ferrari with 439, Mercedes with 373, McLaren with 129, Alpine with 125, Alfa with 52, Aston Martin with 37, Haas with 34, AlphaTauri with 34, and Williams with 6. So really the battle is kind of between Ferrari and Mercedes, who are a certain number of points apart from each other. I'm not going to do that math. And between McLaren and Alpine, McLaren was able to get ahead of Alpine this weekend because Alpine just had a disaster of a weekend. But as our F1 family likes to say, all is still to play for. Also, Haas and AlphaTauri both have 34 points. So, and Aston Martin only has 37. So they're all in contention for 7th, I guess. And Williams is in contention for 10th. Anyway, that concludes the Singapore Grand Prix. Next up is the Japanese Grand Prix, and I'm so excited. I am going to be eating nothing but sushi and katsu all week. And it's going to be amazing. All right. Before I go, I'm annoyingly once again going to ask you guys to like, subscribe, review, follow, and share the podcast with any potential boxes. Love you all and see you soon. Box.